to shine while we give a moment of mine. Listen, listen like a sweet touch on my mind. Yo, we building up the future on this highway.
Welcome to the Civil Engine tutorial series, part of BeyondCAD University. My name is Sam Lytle, the founder of BeyondCAD Incorporated, and this video series is your official introduction to Civil Engine. This is a groundbreaking new software platform built specifically for efficient 3D visualization of transportation and other civil engineering projects. Whether you're an engineer, planner, designer, or visualizer, or other professional, Civil Engine was created with your workflow in mind to make immersive visualization more accessible and more powerful than ever. In this series, we'll walk through the core features and functionality of Civil Engine so you can get up and running quickly. These foundational tutorials are designed to give you the skills to import, add context, and create professional graphics for your projects effectively. For more advanced or specialized topics like advanced traffic, visual graphics, pavement markings, photo compositing, and more, stay tuned for future videos outside this series. What makes this series unique is that I'm not just showing you how to use the software, I'm also the founder of BeyondCAD and the lead creator of Civil Engine, along with an incredible development team. That means I can give you a behind-the-scenes look at how and why the tools work the way they do, offer candid commentary about what still needs improvement, and share insights into the future roadmap as Civil Engine continues to evolve. I've been personally working to democratize visualization in civil engineering for more than a decade, and Civil Engine is the pinnacle achievement of my career. We know that every project is different, and sometimes you need more than a tutorial to get the job done. That's why we offer training and support for our paying customers. So if you hit a roadblock, we're here to help. Just reach out to us on the Contact Us page on our website. You can also request a demo from the same page if you are interested in becoming a paying customer of this software. If you need more help with your visualization, especially in preparing your 3D-based models from CAD or other design data, we offer project-specific consulting services through BeyondCAD Studio. Our experienced team can help you get your models ready for import so you can focus on telling the story of your project in 3D. Visit beyondcadstudio.com to request a quote for your project. We're excited to have you on this journey as we continue to push the boundaries of civil engineering visualization. Let's get started. All right, before we jump into the live version of Civil Engine, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the user interface, which I'll refer to as the UI throughout this tutorial series. Up here in the top left, we have what I'll refer to as the top menu. There will be some access to opening some files. Also, license management will also be up here. Down here in the bottom left, you'll see camera controls. These are also similar to Beyond Typicals, as are many elements of this UI. And then down here in the very bottom left, you'll see this blue button that we call the publisher, and we'll cover that more in detail in a future part of this series. On the right, we have the right panel, and there are a number of different toolbars that can be accessed by clicking there, and that toolbar will pop out. And then in the very bottom right, we have our simulation controls, which allow us to speed up, slow down, or control the traffic and other simulation settings. As for the panel on the right, the icons represent the following tools and features. The top one is import, and then we have asset library, paths, areas, hierarchy, traffic controls, which is a beta feature, environmental controls, phasing, settings, example projects, basic rendering, and then down at the bottom we have the history, which is useful in our undo, redo functionality. Each of these tools and features will be covered more in detail in future parts of this series. And finally, throughout this Civil Engine UI, you will see two different tags. One is a blue B, and the other is an orange double exclamation mark. These are throughout the interface to indicate B for beta features. Those are features that we're still working on improving through testing and development. And the double exclamation mark are areas of Civil Engine that may or may not be highly optimized. So that's kind of a warning sign. If you see that those features or tools or assets may slow down performance. They need to be used sparingly. This, for example, is something like 3D grass, which is beautiful, but when used in abundance will slow down performance on your computer. On that note, Civil Engine is a highly advanced 3D visualization tool. For use, it is recommended that you use at least a 3000 series RTX card from NVIDIA or the equivalent from AMD. There are some settings that we'll show in future parts of this video for better vibration and performance, but you will need as good a graphic card as possible for best experience in using Civil Engine. All right, so let's get started by taking a look around the Getting Started screen that will welcome you upon launch of Civil Engine. One note before I move further is that this is a pre-release and constantly evolving product, and so some things may look slightly different depending on when you're watching this video and when you're using Civil Engine, but for the most part, these principles should apply. All right, so you'll see we have a welcome screen and a welcome message up here. This will change from time to time. Down here in the bottom, we have several different buttons. On the left, we have Import Base Model. We'll talk more about that in the second video, but that's where you can select your base model to get started on a new Civil Engine project. If you've already been working in Civil Engine, you may want to look in the Browse Files section. This will show a list of the most previously worked on Civil Engine files, which are .ce, and you can find more by clicking the Browse Files, which will open a Windows Explorer window, and you can find your .ce file there. If you want to start in a blank project, you can click Create Project, and that's going to open a blank scene with nothing else in the model. If you want to look around example projects, you can click this right button, and you'll see a list of all of the example projects. Again, this may grow over time depending on when you're watching this video. You can also jump into a blank project from here or into any of a number of these other videos. If you want to see project-specific example projects, you can click on some of these buttons up here at the top to narrow down which types of example projects you're looking for. You can return back to the Getting Started screen by clicking Cancel, and then you'll see the same layout as before. If you want to get out of Civil Engine before jumping into a project, you can click to quit up here at the top. And I'll cover example projects more in a future part of this video, but there are even more example projects that aren't delivered as part of the Civil Engine download. That's to save file download space. You can click this button and it will take you to that website, and you can download those larger Civil Engine files, .ce files, so that you can open them from your own desktop. All right, so let's jump into Civil Engine. Again, we're at the Getting Started screen, and I'm going to click on this Create Project button to open a blank project. This is the blank project. We're going to briefly go over navigation. So to move your camera in various directions, you're going to want to right-click the mouse button and move it around to control the direction of your camera. You can also move forward and backward and sideways by holding down that right mouse button and pressing WASD. I'm going to place an object for better reference. So now we're going to go W towards it, A, S back, D to the side. You can also use the scroll wheel to move around your project. And if you want to move more quickly, especially on larger projects, you can also go to Settings, Camera Sensitivity, and turn this, and everything that I just showed will move much more quickly if you have that turned up. One other quick note with navigation is you'll see sometimes the camera just instantly zooms in. That's when I double right click, and that's only possible when you have a base model, and we'll cover that more in the future. But just as a note, that double right click is very effective to zoom into a specific location. All right, so continuing through the various settings, the top portion is visibility. These will make more sense as we learn more about Civil Engine. But for example, you can show FPS, which is frames per second, by clicking here. Also, I mentioned before that there is the Unoptimized tag, which is the double exclamation mark. Whenever that's there, it should be noted that might indicate something that's going to slow down performance on your computer, and this is a good example. For example, with grass, if you have a lot of grass, it's going to use Nanite, which is a special technology to make it so you can show lots of 3D surfaces. And when Nanite is enabled, when you zoom far out, the grass may not be visible. So if you want to force the grass to be there, you can uncheck that. But again, it will impact the performance of your computer. Continuing forward, you can switch between imperial and metric. I mentioned already camera sensitivity, auto backup. This is recommended to turn on, but just note that it will make a backup called a .cet file on a regular basis if that is turned on, and it will save to the same file path as wherever you've been saving your file. It just needs to be noted that that will duplicate the storage space of your Civil Engine file, and so proceed with caution if you do use the auto backup. And the way the auto backup works is if you have a crash and you want to get that, you just need to go get that .cet file and change the file extension to be .ce, and then you can open it in a new session of Civil Engine. And then finally, we have editor settings, and these can affect the performance of Civil Engine. For default, they're turned to the highest quality, so it's going to look the best and give you the best results. But if things get slowed, you can also go to one of the lower settings. So by default, it's on Ultra, but we can go down to lowest. We can apply that, and you'll see here that it turned off the shadows. Also, the edges might be a little more jagged. That's called anti-aliasing, and that will allow you to move around more efficiently. And if you do this while looking at your FPS, you may see that that number is going to jump up because it's able to move more quickly because there's just not as much processing in the background. And so these are settings that you can play around with to get that best balance of performance and visual fidelity, especially while you're working. Although when you render, it is recommended that you go back up to Ultra to get the highest quality results. All right, so let's now look in the 3D space of Civil Engine. I already placed an asset, and I can click that by clicking this Civil Engine selector icon. You'll see here we have the title of the asset up here at the top. That's going to pop up every time you select an asset or a path or an area. And then we have the transform gizmo, which is this 3D system used to rotate or move an asset in 3D space. And so you can take your own time practicing moving around an asset in the space. Whenever you select something in Civil Engine, you will see the details panel pop up on the left. And this is going to look different depending on what type of object you're selecting. But for this example, you'll see here that we have location information about this tree, so we could relocate using these settings. We could also adjust the rotation and the scaling through here. And as we continue to look through more advanced features of Civil Engine, we will go through the unique features that are available in the details panel for each of the different objects, whether it be imports or dynamic assets or paths or areas. They're all going to have their own set of customizable features in the details panel over here on the left. And again, as part of the development of Civil Engine, we took Beyond Typicals 3 and we forked it so that we could have the best tool possible, because we've had so much good feedback from Beyond Typicals. But because of that, there might be some legacy elements that we haven't gotten to yet. And so if you do see something that doesn't work in the details panel or even in the right panel, it may be because it's a legacy element that we're still trying to clean up as part of that transition from the Beyond Typicals to Civil Engine. All right, now I want to cover the hierarchy, which is one of the most important parts of using Civil Engine. You'll see here I've clicked the icon and it pops out, and anything you place in Civil Engine is going to show up in the hierarchy. And there are a number of different types of objects, whether they be imported base models, imported assets, static assets, dynamic assets, paths, areas. They will all show up in the hierarchy. So in our example here, if you go to assets, we do have that asset. So we can select it here in the hierarchy as well as in 3D space using the selector icon. Let's, for example, you add some more trees using our path tool and area tool. Again, we'll cover these more in detail in future portions of this series. But let's place some trees using a path system. So you'll see here we've got some trees there. And then let's place similar trees using an area system. So we'll talk more about how to customize these paths and areas in the future, but you can see here we have a number of the same similar types of beech trees placed in 3 different methods. All of those are going to show up in the hierarchy. So we can select that path here, we can select the area here, and we can select the asset here. Another note is down here in the bottom right, we have our simulation settings that I'll cover more in a little bit. But if you want to turn off the path visualizers or area visualizers or stop bar visualizers, which are part of our advanced traffic, you can turn those on and off down here. All right, so let's say that we want to place some more trees individually. So let's place a few more of those. Again, we have paths, we have individually placed assets, and we have areas. Let's go back to our hierarchy. You can see here now we have a number of beech trees that have been placed. Every time you place anything in the hierarchy, in 3D space that shows up in the hierarchy, it's going to get a unique number so that you can know that this is beech tree number 4, which is unique from beech tree number 1. One other note about placing trees or other organic assets like bushes, grass, rocks, and so on is each time you place it, it slightly randomizes the rotation and the scale so that you get a more organic look. We don't want trees that look like they are fake, and that's gonna give us that look. So let's say that we want to organize these trees together. We can select them all holding down Control like this, and now you can see I've selected all these trees. Alternatively, we can select one on the top, hold down Shift, select one on the bottom, and we can select them all that way. Let's organize them by selecting all of these except one, and then we can right click and you'll see we have some more options. We have Remove, so you can delete them this way. You can wrap with Folder, Copy, and Paste. And at the time of the recording, not all of our copy and paste functions are fully implemented, but let's wrap with Folder. So now you can see here we have this folder with these trees. We can turn off assets individually using this visualizer icon, the visibility icon, excuse me. And we can also drop down to see those assets individually in there. If we want to add more to the folder, then we can just drag and add them in like that. You can also remove them from the folder by dragging out like that. And then finally you can lock the folder. And once it's locked, then those selector icons won't show up anymore. And you'll probably notice throughout this series that I used lock unlock quite a bit, because when you get a lot of those selector icons, things tend to get really busy. And so the best practice is just to keep those organized into folders and then lock them. And then let's say that we want to organize things as much as possible, either in the details panel on the left or here in the hierarchy. And so now you can see we've got trees, and we can drag this one back in. As long as it's not locked, we can lock it, and we can turn on and off the visibility. You can also delete like so, and then we can undo by going Control Z. I will give a word of caution that undo redo tends to become very slow as you get larger and larger projects, because it's kind of a save unload every time you do that. And so starting out, it's going to be fine, but just a word of caution that undo redo should be used sparingly on larger and larger projects. All right, so as we go to other areas of the hierarchy, then you'll notice the UI is consistent. So if we want to turn off this area, we can do it like so, and the same thing with the paths. We can turn on and off all of our assets through the hierarchy, and we can do the same thing with locking or deleting through this system. And so as we go through Civil Engine, through various example projects, you'll see each of them have varying levels of organization based on whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish. You're not required to organize everything into folders. Things will work the same whether they are or not, but it does become more and more useful to have things organized into folders as you get further on in the complexity of your project, or if you're working with others, or there are scenarios where maybe you've placed a ton of trees and you want to turn them off while you're working because it's slowing things down. Having them all organized in a folder in the hierarchy is a really quick and easy way to just turn off the visibility so that you can work more efficiently with your FPS at a higher rate with those elements turned off. All right, so now I'm back at the Getting Started screen. I've clicked on the Example Projects button, and I want to go through these one by one and just kind of highlight how these can be used to learn more about Civil Engine, to explore, to learn, to build upon, and so on. And you're totally welcome to make changes to these, save them as your own save files, and do whatever you need to practice and become more efficient with Civil Engine. When you are on this page, and the same is true for the right panel, where you can also access these example projects, you'll see a thumbnail of the project. You'll also see the name of the project, and some of these are donated by some of our customers, like this one that I'm going to go to right now is Ardura. If you click this button, it will take you to Ardura's webpage. All right, so that took a couple seconds to open, but now we are in this Florida DDI example project. And again, to navigate, you can use the mouse controls, left and right buttons, and then you can also use WASD to navigate around the project. And I invite you to also use the scroll wheel to zoom out and just kind of see the extents. This is a good example of how we don't need to build the project way into the distance to still be able to communicate it and not have the camera show that it's cut off on the edges. So this is interesting for a number of reasons. Again, it's a really good model, and we've got a number of traffic paths placed here. And when I say traffic, I mean not only vehicles, but also pedestrians and cyclists. And you can see here that we have an intersection right here on this end of the diverging diamond, and then we've got one on the other end. And using the advanced traffic settings, again, this is a beta feature, but you could handle this with 2 intersections, but in this example, we actually are handling it using 1. And we can show that by going to turn on the stop bar visualizers, and now you'll see where those stop bars are located on each of these paths. So some of these paths show up more than once in this intersection controller, again, including the pedestrians. You can turn on the path visualizers to see where those are, but those can often be distracting. So you can see here, now these lanes are green, which means they're going through, the other ones are waiting. And then another nice thing about this project is we're utilizing some of the dynamic traffic signals, and some of these can be linked to the intersection controllers. So they'll be green as the traffic's going through, and they'll cycle through to yellow and then ultimately to red when the traffic stops. So when you get in, feel free to edit these, edit the durations of each of these phases, the yellow, the red, all of the above, to kind of see how this process works. Also, down here on the bottom, we have the simulation controls, and right now, by default, it's on 1x, but if we wanted to, we could set that to 0.1, and you can see now this is really like a slow-mo. And that simulation is only the traffic, so it's not going to slow down something like the speed of the leaves blowing in the wind with the trees, or some other animations like the construction equipment or the windmills. It's just the traffic speed down here. And then we can conversely speed it up to something like 5x, and this is really cool to get a good idea of if your intersection is working on without having to wait for the full cycle to go through. One note of a bug is if you really turn this up high, you'll start to get backups. You'll see it up here on the freeway, and that's something that we're planning on working on. But if you do that, you can just reset the traffic by clicking this to turn it off and then turn it back on. So you can use the 10x or the 50x, but if you use them for a long period of time, it's not able to clear out the traffic at the end, and so you get those backups. So the recommended setting is 1x, 2x, 5x if you want to do it for longer periods of time. If we take a look at the hierarchy, you can see here we've got some organization. Again, there will be various levels of organization in the hierarchies of these example projects. Part of the value of Civil Engine is that you can do some of the striping, which we'll cover in the path video. And we've kind of augmented the striping in this. And so you can turn that on and off by unlocking and turning the visibility toggle. And then you can also see what these other ones do. You can see here we've got some trees and landscaping trees. And so if you wanted to, you could turn off all of the, you could turn off everything. These are all the paths, and we don't have any areas here. You could also turn off all the assets and then kind of turn them all back on to build out your scene to see how this is constructed. Again, feel free to reverse engineer this or any of these example projects to get a better understanding of how this software works. All right, now we're going to jump into the next one, which is bridge construction with Detour. This is our own BeyondCAD Studio project. This one is very unique because we took the time to break this up into small pieces and then use the phasing system to add a number of different phases, and then everything placed in the hierarchy can be tagged with those phases. So some of these you're going to see them grayed out. That means that the phase that they're tagged to is just not turning on. Or it's not turned on currently, and that's why they're showing up like that. And then also there are a number of base models here because we brought in each of these pieces separately so that they could be phased for more granular phase control. And if we go to the publisher, again, we'll cover this more in detail in the future, but you can go to the 4D phasing, see this Gantt chart. It says new chart. If I scroll down and do phase track size, we can go to small. And now I can go through these. I'm just scrubbing left and right on the scrub bar, but you could also push play. And it will go through and build out this scenario where we have a road crossing an earthen embankment, and we want to replace it with a bridge, but we've got to do something with the traffic. And so we have this detour, which is this orange bar that is for a lot of the duration of this project. We've also got some temporary dams so that the contractor can work in a drier environment. So this is a pretty neat project. Feel free again to reverse engineer, especially the phasing. Also on our website or our YouTube channel, you can see the full video as part of my Civil Visualizing with Sam, where I walk through this project from beginning to end. And that's the same is true for many of these example projects. If you have more questions about how they were built, watch those videos and you'll find some more answers there. All right, the next one is Waterfront Park. This is a SketchUp model that was imported and is interesting for a number of reasons. We have water here, and there are a number of ways to place water, which we'll cover in a special video, not as part of this series, but afterward. And then we've got pedestrians, we've got cyclists, we've got scooter riders, and we've even got traffic. And then we've got some generic buildings here in the distance. And we've utilized the striping again here in our hierarchy. We can see that by going to paths, and we can unlock these so we can turn them on and off. So some of these are trees, pedestrians, traffic, and striping. And so again, you can recreate kind of how this was built from that and get a better understanding of how this project works. This one only has one base model, but you can see if I turn it off, this is kind of how it looks. And this is important to note because if you have your own base model and something changes, then you can import the new one and you don't have to redo all this other stuff. It will just refresh. You may have to reassign textures. We do plan to add some import refreshing options in the future, but re-importing base models it doesn't require you to completely rebuild the project from the ground up. You just have to adjust the textures. One thing to note as well is when you start these projects, when you jump into one of your projects, whether it's an example project or a safe project, the traffic is just kind of filled up automatically, and it may not initially use the parameters that you've set. So if there is lower density, it may have higher density when you first start in. And so you can always reset it. And then if you want to like speed the traffic along the paths, you just turn up the speed, and then you're going to get a better idea of what the parameters of your traffic paths also actually are. And then one thing that I like to show on this project, and I do it often on demos, is the fact that if I double right click, again, that's going to zoom the camera and lock the orbit point, and then press F1, then I can walk this project. And I like to do this one because it has stairs, and that's just one of the cool features as part of this explore mode is you can do that. And I'm using WASD I'm rotating with the right mouse click on my mouse, and I'm running by using Shift. We will have more options for Explore mode in the future, and I'll show this more in detail in future parts of the series, but for now you can feel free to check that out. All right, so the next video we're going to jump into this Montague Peanut, which is another donated model from our customer HMH Engineers. This is a project in the Bay Area, and again we've utilized the striping on this project. If you go to Paths and if we lock traffic and unlock striping, we can see how this project would look without any of the striping. And currently it can be tedious to place this much striping because we don't have the ability to import CAD line work and have it replaced with stripes. In the future we hope to do that, but for now you do have to place them one by one. That said, if you are able to do striping using Civil Engine, you will get some more realistic texturing than like if you import the faces of your striping through some other method. And again, I often keep these locked because if you don't, you're going to just see a bunch of selector icons and group areas, which is if the icons are on top of each other, this is how you can kind of choose between them. But most of the time, I'm going to keep those locked as much as possible. All right, the next project is what we call Tropical Resort Entrance. This is just another simple SketchUp model. If you zoom out, you can see there's not a lot going on here, but when you zoom in, we can get some pretty cool views. We can see that we've got some cyclists as part of this path. Again, there's a lot of cyclists here, but if you reset the traffic, it's probably not going to be that dense. We've also utilized some of our very realistic tropical trees and bushes. And this is pretty basic, but a good example of how you don't need to have a huge model, a huge base model to get going. In Civil Engine, you can do some pretty simple stuff and still have really good quality. The next one is European road section, and this is very similar, and this embraces the aesthetic that we're trying to popularize with Beyond Typicals, which is kind of the floating section of ground in the sky. And it's very useful because you don't have to model way into the distance with terrain or trees or buildings or other contexts. You can just focus on your project. And if more and more users can utilize this type of aesthetic, then visualization is going to be more accessible on more projects. And so that's why we've included this. We're very much encouraging more simple projects, more focused projects, so that we can get visualization on more and more of the projects rather than having to spend big budgets on creating the surrounding context. While I'm here, I also want to show the environment tools. So if you click on the sun icon, then you can change the time of the day by rotating, by going through this spin box. And again, all the spin boxes operate the same way through the UI, they should. And then you can also, so this is the time of the day, and then you can adjust the rotation this way. You can always click and drag, or you can type in precise numbers in any part of our UI, and then you can adjust the intensity if you want it to be dark, or if you want it to be light, or just leave it at the default, which is 6. We also have background controls. These are going to be more and more useful if you do something like this, but by default, you'll have a blue sky. But if you want to make something more colorful or match colors of your projects, you can change these gradient colors and get a different look for your project. And that's just a nice option that we have. And then also we have control for clouds here, so you can turn them on and off. Or we can lower the height. If you want like a foggy scenario, you could bring the clouds way down. You can also control the density of the clouds. And feel free to play around with all of these parameters when you're doing your own project, especially if it's one of these section types that we have here. And you can also turn off the gradient background if you want to see what that looks like. And now we'll jump to the final projects. This next one, we call it Bend Roundabout. This is a roundabout intersection in Bend, Oregon, that we modeled as part of this Beyond CAD Studio. And again, this is another way we can display our project. We're able to see all of the important parameters. There's roundabout without the need for a lot of surrounding context or aerials or buildings or so on. And when you're able to do these types of projects, it's much more affordable because your base model is flat, it's simple, and you can import it and visualize it very quickly. Another thing that you can do with this project is if you go to the basic rendering tab, go to photo compositing, you can turn on some of these images, and this is our photo compositing tool, which we'll cover in a special video in the future. But for now, if you go, you need to go to 4K for our resolution, and then you have to camera match. You can see here the white ground is kind of conflicting. And so what we want to do is I have a phase called composite off. And now you can see here, I can just camera match this. And this is can be tedious. It takes a little bit of time. In the future, we hope to have some more automated controls, but for now, when you do, you can save your camera like I've done here, preset 6. You can see some other views that I was doing that you can see with some of the other images. But using photo compositing, now we can render this, again, without the need to import or model all of the existing terrain. And this could be rendered as an image or a video, as long as the camera stays static as it is here. All right, this project is simply called Loop Ramp, and this is a loop ramp for a highway, but we've added some extra context with some phasing and some visual graphics. So you can see here, we've got an area highlight, we've got some of our dynamic asset construction vehicles, these rollers here, and these are really nice to communicate whatever construction it is that your project needs to communicate. We've got our dirt detour road. We've got this lane of traffic kind of limited as part of this project. And so this combines multiple elements to show how you can use visual graphics, labels, construction equipment to better communicate your project. And you can examine it more fully by going to the hierarchy. And again, this just has one base model. So what it looks like if you turn that off. And then the trees here were placed before we had the area placement tool. And so you can turn them all off like that. And you'll notice if you do that, the speed of your civil engine running will be a little bit faster. Your frames per second will probably increase. Again, this is what I was talking about earlier. You can go to visibility, FPS, and right now it's around 20. If I turn those trees back on, then it's going to drop because it's just has to produce so many more assets and objects. For context, this is running slower because I'm running on a 4K resolution screen, and I'm using a mobile RTX 4090, and so you can test around on these with your own specs to see what sort of performance you get. All right, those are the main example projects as of now. Again, in the future, there may be more of these that you can explore. We also have the blank project, which we already went through. And then down here at the bottom, we have what we call the empty slabs. This is kind of a really easy way to just jump in and start getting started with Civil Engine, placing objects, and so forth. So we're going to go to the paths presets here and go to our pavement markings. And then let's just make a simple road. Let's make 2-lane highway, no passing. I'm going to click a few points, and now we've got our road on our asphalt. So now that we have that here, we can go to the traffic peds portion, and let's just do traffic no trucks. And now we can do traffic in each of the lanes. By default, it doesn't have the path visualizer on, so we can turn that on if we want to. And if it's annoying to have these cars driving when you're placing paths, then you can always just shut that off down here using that circle. So we can place the points along this road. All right, and so now if I turn my traffic back on and I turn my path visualizers back off, you can see we've got a simple road going. You also notice that part of these traffic presets, they're is a wear path, and that's by design to give a more realistic look to your projects. So if we wanted to continue building this out, we could add some buildings very easily. We could also add some trees, and then we could set up some cameras and make some really basic renderings. So hopefully you get an idea of how, using all of these features and assets in conjunction with each other, you can start to get some efficient visualization out of Civil Engine. Just briefly, down here in the bottom left, the camera settings, you can adjust the field of view here. So by default, this one's at 50, and that's just kind of how zoomed in or out it is. On most projects, it's going to be 60 by default. And also we have the free camera right here where you can move it around. But if we want to orbit it, we can go like that. And then we can adjust our orbit distance, our orbit angle, and so on, speed. That's a very quick way to set up a camera and render it out using basic rendering. If we wanted to set, let's say, a camera for 10 seconds at 60 frames per second, we could choose the folder and we could render it out like this. There are also pan tools. So right now we've got in relation to camera, but you could do also in relation to world. You can adjust the speed on this. And then if you want to fine tune your camera controls, you can do them here. And this can be very useful, for example, when you're doing compositing and trying to do a camera match. These are for fine tune adjustments of your camera. And also you've got your pitch and your yaw and your camera distance. Those are all part of those camera settings down on the bottom left. All right, so that wraps up this first part of the Civil Engine tutorial series. My name is Sam Lytle. I'm excited to see you in video number 2, where we talk about importing and texturing.
Infrastructure's rising like the sun in the sky.